Traveling in the backcountry can be overwhelming. Over the years, AAI has developed a backcountry checklist to help all of us with a more systematic approach to the backcountry. We break this checklist down into 3 parts: pre-trip planning, on tour, and a post-trip discussion. Let's take a look at all 3 sections. The first thing we look at when planning a day in the backcountry is current conditions. Recent avalanche activity. If there's recent avalanche activity, I want to know where it is, what elevation it's at, what aspect it's at, and how widespread. This helps me with my route planning. If I have a specific objective and yet there's avalanche activity on that same aspect and elevation, I need to readjust my plans for the day. I'm also going to look at the weather. I want to ask the question, is the weather contributing to instability? I can find that out by looking at, is it precipitating? Is it snowing or raining? And how hard is it doing that? And is the wind blowing? And if so, how hard is the wind blowing? Those things contribute to increased avalanche hazard. Again, it's going to help me with my route planning. And finally, I want to look at what the Avalanche Forecast Center is telling me about current conditions. What's the avalanche hazard? Is the hazard low? Is it high? This again is going to guide me into what terrain is appropriate for the day when I'm out touring. The first thing I look at is the hazard rating. Is it high? Is it considerable? Is it moderate? And then I dig deeper. I look at what the avalanche problems of the day are. As a backcountry traveler, I like to choose routes where I avoid the avalanche problem. So if the forecaster of the day is telling me that there's a wind slab problem, I'm going to plan a route that avoids windy areas. These avalanche problems help us understand exactly what the forecaster is thinking when they're putting out the hazard, and they give us a sense of terrain that we should avoid. Now that I have a grasp on current conditions and avalanche problems, the next step is route planning. We have open, closed, and standby terrain. Open terrain is innocent until proven guilty. It's terrain that, based on the avalanche forecast, is avoiding the avalanche problem. For example, if the forecasted problem is a wind slab problem, I'm going to choose sheltered terrain that's less than 30 degrees. That is my open terrain.
Sweet, dude.
Closed terrain is guilty. It's off limits. We commit to avoiding this terrain before we put our boots on, so we're not tempted to travel in that hazardous terrain when we get out in the field. Standby terrain is guilty until proven innocent. I need more information before I'm willing to travel in this terrain. I may want to do some stability tests and investigate whether or not the avalanche problem is present on this standby slope. The final step in tour planning is drilling down to the specific slopes we may want to travel in. We'll look at slope angle, slope aspect, elevation. We can find all that information in local guidebooks, online resources, and topographic maps. The next step is to make sure I'm on the same page as my backcountry partners. I want to make sure we're all okay with the terrain we've identified as open, as closed, and on standby. It's important to be on the same page before walking out the door. We all make sure that we're prepared with rescue gear as well as with clothing that's appropriate for the forecasted temperatures. And in the parking lot, I always do a transceiver check before I start touring. While I'm touring, I focus on a few questions. Is the terrain that we're traveling in consistent with the pre-trip plan? Are we following through on what we all agreed on? Have we seen any signs of instability? Those can include recent avalanche activity, collapsing, or shooting cracks. Those are Mother Nature screaming in our ear, and if we're seeing those, we need to choose less complex, lower angle terrain. While we're assessing a slope we want to ski or ride, additional questions we want to ask are, what's the likelihood of triggering an avalanche, and what are the consequences? This is really important to assess before you jump into a piece of terrain. It's also important to ask if group dynamics or human factor are contributing to the day's decision making. If my newfound ski partner is a lot more aggro than I thought they would be, then we just need to back off on the objective for the day. With the answers to all these questions, I can make a go or no-go decision. And once I do, I want to make sure again that we're on the same page, that everyone knows how we're going to approach a slope, the travel order, and any escape routes we've identified before jumping in. The last part of the checklist is the post-trip discussion. This is where we ask the question, did we make good decisions or did we just get lucky? Take the time with your partners to answer, did the conditions match the forecast? Did we manage terrain well? And do we have any concerns for future tours? And don't forget to share any observations and learnings with the Forecast Center. It's important for all of us to learn from what you saw out there. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all of these variables. Most of us do most of these things most of the time. We use this checklist so all of us do all of these things all the time. The goal of the checklist is to increase our margin of safety.